Thank you, Linda. I want to acknowledge a few people who have helped make this program a reality. One of them is this wonderful woman you just heard from, Linda Willis, who's been with me for so long. And Linda is someone who, for the last 6 or 7 years, has been by my side all over the world, helping me do these things, and out of the goodness of her heart, and she has just been one of the tremendous supporters of this project. There's some other people here that I really want to acknowledge. Jordan Peace, who is here, has been helping me all over the West Coast and around for the last 6 months. I want to acknowledge Ralph Steiner, who helped set up the AV for this, but who also is here in Berkeley. He's one of your local folks here. Ralph goes way back. We go way back on all this stuff for about a decade now, I guess. And he's the guy who helped us film some of these witnesses, along with Leslie Kane. I don't know if she's here today, who was over in San Rafael here in the Bay Area. So they've just been tremendous help. Leslie Kane was KPFA or one of these things. We also have a whole group of local people who have been volunteering to help us with this event. Thomas Harnett, Steve Capely, Abigail Lewis, Abby, she's been helping me, schlepping me around the Bay Area for the last month I've been out here, it seems. Ed Correa, Eric Salter, Bob Tesh, Tony Pinto, and Yarrow Mako, of all people who have been helping us with this today. And I'd like to thank all of you for doing this. Thank you so much. I love the temperature in here, so cool and nice. If it's above 68 degrees, I'm miserable. So this is just great. It's wonderful to be here in the Bay Area to speak to all of you about what we've been doing. And the real heroes in this whole process have been the 400 and so military intelligence and government insiders, about 119 or 20 or so that we've filmed already, and there's another 122 now that we've identified that we hope to start filming this year and getting their information out to the public, who have been the insiders who've seen this information firsthand, have been present at extraterrestrial or UFO events, have been scientists who work in side projects, and have seen what has been done to silence the public knowledge on this. And these are people who I had to gradually bring forward. And I want to just to give you an idea of how this has all happened, how we've gotten to where we are today, where on May 9th, 1 or 2 billion people around the world heard about the Disclosure Project and the fact that UFOs might be real, and there were these military people coming forward. That was a 10-year project that started really in the early 90s. And in 1992, 91 and 92, the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence was formed, and I founded that to go around and see if these so-called UFOs were real. And not only if they were real, but how we could contact them and establish communication with them. And we did. A lot of people say, you gotta be kidding. I said, no, we actually were able to get these things vectored into areas where we had close contact with these objects. And by 1993, this had happened on a number of occasions. Many witnesses, videotapes of them. And what happened was that we concluded that, we can only take this so far. Our goal was to establish a diplomatic contact with these life forms, these creatures, or whatever. But what happened is that we realized that there was this huge disconnect from what the public knew and from what our public officials knew and what we could prove was real. So there's this huge yawning gap between what consensual reality was and what reality was. So the conventional wisdom, of course, out there is, well, none of this is true, it's all X-Files nonsense, it's make-believe. And we realized that this was not only true in the public domain, but it was very true in your political leadership. So in 1993, we started what was then called Project Starlight. Project Starlight was a code name, actually, initially, that was created by this spook who set up my meeting with the CIA director, President Clinton's first CIA director that I met with in 1993. quite frankly, it was an effort to put together witnesses with senior executive staff in the President's office and Congressional leaders and United Nations officials and say, look, this is real, and we want your help in getting this out. Not assuming what they knew or how much they knew. Well, it turned out they didn't know anything. For the most part, your leadership in Washington know a lot less about these things than you do if you sat through this hour or 2-hour film. What did you show? 1 hour or 2 hour? 1 hour. Yeah. We have a 4-hour one. That's the one you really need to see. Take all day to do it. But here's the thing. When I was meeting with the CIA director, I learned that he was holding his head in his hands almost in tears saying, my God, what am I going to do? He says, we have made inquiries into this, we can't find out. And I thought he was lying. I thought this was a prevarication by this uber spook. But it wasn't. He was telling us the truth. And Clinton, of course, asked Webster Hubbell, his close friend and third in command of justice, to look into this, and was told nothing existed along these lines. There were no exotic energy systems, there were no black projects dealing with UFOs, and of course they knew they were being lied to. So as a point of default, I get brought in to start meeting with these guys. And I'm a country doctor at the time living in Virginia. And I'm there thinking, well, this is surreal. I'll find someone to cover my shift in the emergency department. Well, my wife and I fly to Washington to brief the CIA director in the President's Inner Circle on UFOs. Hello. I mean, this is when, this is like going through the looking glass, and everything. I haven't come out yet, you see. I'm still Alice in Wonderland. But what happened in this process is that we learned that except with a few people, there are a few people within the Congress and within the executive staff who do know this stuff. But most of our leadership has been lied to just like you have. And it's the case of the emperor not having any clothes. I mean, you think that these people have enormous power, and that the president can wave a magic wand, or the Senate chairman of intelligence can wave a magic wand and find out about this stuff. I was meeting with people who were on the Senate Intelligence Committee back in the mid-90s who were telling me they could not find anything on this subject. Senator Byrd himself, the king of pork, chairman of Senate Appropriations Committee, his chief investigator was ordered by him to look into these UFO issues because they knew that there was somewhere between 40 and 80 billion, $40 to $80,000 million per annum going into black projects that they had no control over, and they knew a lot of it was related to this subject. So they asked us, to begin to look into this, and this investigator, an attorney for the Senate Appropriations Committee, and I met. He says, we know this is going on, but with a top secret clearance and subpoena power on behalf of the United States Senate, we could not penetrate those projects. He looked at me, and this was in January of '94. He says, Doctor, you are dealing with the varsity team, his words, of all black projects. And I said, yes, I know that. What are you going to do about it? He said, well, we're not going to do anything about it. We're going to tangle with that. And so what we found is between 93 and 97, we continued this process of identifying insiders, getting their testimony, putting them in front of people like Woolsey, the CIA director, or in front of people like the chairman of the House Government Reform and Oversight Committee, Congressman Dan Burton, who's issued 1,000 subpoenas on things like Whitewater and other big investigative exposés of the century. But please, the blowjob heard around the world, they think this is investigative reporting. Excuse me, this is the biggest secret in history that we're dealing with here. And, we have a world that is dying in front of us, and you don't have people with the courage to do the right thing. So what we found in 1997, I took about 15 of these military and intelligence witnesses and gathered 30 congressional offices and members of Congress, and Congressman Dan Byrd, chairman of House Government Reform and Oversight, was there. This was a closed meeting at the West End Hotel in Georgetown. And the witnesses told us congressmen and senators. There were some executive staff people and some Pentagon people there, and told them everything they knew. And we waited a year, and Congress did nothing. So we said, okay, we're going to put this together ourselves, and we're going to put together a coalition of people in the public, we the people, along with these courageous men and women willing to come forward. And we're going to start pushing it out there ourselves. We are going to become the de facto government disclosure, and that's what we've become, by default. It was offered first to the president, and the president's closest friend flew to my home and said he would love to see this done, but we're convinced he'll end up like Jack Kennedy if he does this. This is a quote from one of Bill Clinton's close friends. And I laughed. I thought the guy was joking. Ha, 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 ha. He says, no, we're not kidding. I thought he was joking. The congressmen have had the same effect. Congressman Dan Burton, his chief of staff, started having weird things happening electronically with his phones. Scared these guys off. He said, basically, this is too big a fish for us to reel in. Go shop it somewhere else. Senate Intelligence Committee member Dick Bryan, who just retired out of Nevada. I met with him at McCarran Airport. I was put on one of those little carts and taken to this little room. It looked like a janitor's closet. Went inside of it, and it was this beautiful conference room. Anyway, you go figure, McCarran Airport. But this is where VIPs would meet while they're in transit. But what happened from all these meetings is that these guys would go through, it's like the stages of death and dying. You know, there's denial and shock and anger. But what happens to most of these leaders is that then fear sets in. This is either all false or it's true. If it's true, it's the biggest story in history. And it involves the most powerful technologies in all of time. It involves the most extraordinary energy and propulsion systems that would take our civilization and put it into a sustainable pathway, so that we can continue on for thousands of years without cannibalizing Gaia, the Mother Earth. The problem is, who's got the courage to do this? Well, you know, I have a place in Adams Morgan, 3 doors down from Gary Condon's place. And, you know, courage doesn't, look, politicians, most of them are lawyers. They're looking out for number one. They're looking out for their ambitions and their career. Don't see a lot of courage to do the right thing. So what we've concluded is that the people are going to have to rise up, speak, demand change and action, and in addition, not put all their eggs in the baskets that are inside the Beltway in Washington. Let's do it ourselves. It's time for us to take back the world, the civilization that was hijacked by a rogue group of fascists. I'm using this word as it really is, a rogue group of fascists in the 40s and 50s who arrogated to themselves the prerogatives of the constitutional requirements of our civilization, not just here but overseas as well, and who decided that they knew best and that they would determine who knew what and when it was let out. And the result is the world we see today, where 80% of the world's population lives in abject poverty, where there is this crushing exponential decay of our biosphere, where if 10% more of the world's population, which would be 600 million people, a number equal to the population of all of America and Europe, began to live like you and I do, the price of fossil fuels would go up by an order of magnitude of tenfold, and it would collapse the Western economy. It is a zero-sum game that guarantees and requires mind-numbing poverty and death on the face of the earth for 80% of its inhabitants. That's the world that has been created and the world that we have to transform. I'm not sanguine that this will be done by any high-minded public officials in Washington or in any other country. I am confident that people, like those of us in this room, can combine our forces and our resources and our will and our vision, and that vision will guide the world. Because if we lead, the leaders will follow. Because they'll have to. on these issues only to give you some historical background of what has been a 12-year journey for me personally. And if someone had told me 10 or 12 years ago I'd be doing this, that I would have abandoned my medical career, that I would be risking everything I have and love to try to get this done, I would have laughed. For one thing, we really thought that if you got the evidence and the proof in front of the right people, they would do the right thing. Ain't gonna happen, ain't never gonna happen. Now, I know that sounds cynical and bitter, but it isn't. I know inside the Beltway like the back of my hand, and I know all the players. And the thing is this, they are petrified of acting unless there's massive public support that it makes it a fait accompli. Only when it's a fait accompli, then will they act. Okay, when it's a done deal. So we have to make it a fait accompli. We have to make that a reality, and then they will reactively say, oh yes, of course, let's support this. That's the way it's done. Unless you kind of deliver bags of cash to certain people. In 1992, I had the head of Army Intelligence offer me a board seat on this MD-12 group, as it used to be called, the Majority or Majestic 12 group. And I was told that I could have all the money and all the technology I wanted if I would do what they wanted me to do on this issue. This is the same offer they gave to Carl Sagan, by the way. And he took it. I rejected it. And in a sense, my life has been hell ever since. But I don't regret it. It was the right thing to do. After I told him no, though, he went around and did it to my wife and said, you know, we really want your husband on this board that's dealing with all these things and these sort of shadowy government, a funny term that came out recently, secret government entities. And Emily thought this was such a great idea. He says, oh, how nice they're inviting you. I said, this is like a country club in hell. I don't want to be invited into this crowd. And not a chance. So we rejected that pathway because it had no integrity. This is the pathway that has integrity. And it's true that the motto of the National Reconnaissance Office is, we own the night. But it's also true that we own the light. We own disclosure. And if we move this thing into the light, that's where they can't step without exposing themselves. It's like a keto. You take the energy, you turn it around. And that's what we're doing. We're taking this information, putting it out there for the people to see, and we're explaining the best that we can why this matters. Now, if it was just a matter of, you know, people from other planets watching what we're doing, et cetera, and so on, you know, that probably would only get a few of the retrograde, ultra-orthodox sort of religious kooks up in arms. But it's really about how the planet runs. The secrecy around this issue isn't, you think it's about money, it isn't about money per se, it's about what trillions of dollars in money represent, geopolitical power. Let me explain what I mean. The technologies which we are going to be disclosing, if we are at all capable of doing so in the next coming months and years, are technologies, any one of which, would terminate the oil and coal, natural gas, internal combustion engine, nuclear power infrastructure that runs planet Earth on this date, 2002. These technologies have been in existence since at least the 1940s and 50s, and complete anti-gravity reproduction vehicles based on extraterrestrial devices have been fully functional and flying around since the 60s, capable of going faster than the speed of light. By the time my uncle's lunar module, my uncle designed the lunar module that took Neil Armstrong to the moon, he was a senior project engineer at Grumman. By the time that thing landed on the moon, using its little thrusters and this and that, we already had these so-called alien reproduction vehicles, or ARVs, that Mark McCandlish will tell you about in a few minutes. Up and flying. You have a parallel space program, a parallel governmental infrastructure, and as Senator Inouye said, a secret government with its own Air Force, its own Navy, its own funding mechanism that is above the law and beyond the reach of the law itself. I'm paraphrasing the quote by Senator Inouye. The issue is, given those forces that are arrayed against this information coming out, you talk about the mother of all special interests. It's a $4.5 or $5 trillion a year energy and transportation infrastructure. How do we, little guys, make a change? Well, we put one foot in front of the other. An Apollo astronaut that I met with years ago and that I brought to some of my meetings at the Pentagon, he was at one of the meetings where I was briefing the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I've had some gnarly meetings. If someone had told me I'd be sitting there with these admirals and generals telling them about extraterrestrials and UFOs because they were being denied access to them. I mean, it's through the looking glass. God almighty. But this man said, you know, it's such a huge thing to bite off. Just put one step in front of the other and do it. That's what we're doing. But I ask you to join with us. You know, if we join hands, lock arms, and do this, we can do it. I think that the world is ready for this information. It's been ready for probably since before I was born. I'm the spring chicken. I was born in 1955. And what I have found is that these technologies, which have been suppressed illegally by a group that is transnational, paragovernmental, and rogue. I'm not talking about legal and properly supervised secrecy, even if it's misguided sometimes. I'm talking about genuinely rogue, illegal projects that murder people, that lie to presidents, which we can prove, would lie to members of Congress, and who have arrogated to themselves the right to determine what is best. Those groups we have declared illegal. And what that means is this. Any one of you who knows someone or who has himself been in one of those projects, you hereby have permission to come forward, as these witnesses have, and as another 100 of them will do, I hope, this year. Why? Basic legal theory. Now, I'm just a country doctor who lives in Virginia now. But here's what we've learned from our legal scholars. Let's say, this is like the RICO Act, or the laws are, if you have a criminal enterprise operating outside the law, anyone who has a contract with that criminal enterprise is freed of the obligations of that contract because it has no enforceability, because the fundamental operation was an illegal enterprise. We can prove in any court of law that the groups running these projects have, with knowledge of forethought and malice, lied to members of Congress, lied to U.S. presidents, denied them access to key information, and have engaged in a pattern of criminal behavior up to and including murder, torture, abductions, etc. That group cannot be viewed as a legal entity. It is rogue, unconstitutional. Therefore, all the projects they are shielding, all the oaths they have extracted from people, all the agreements that are out there related to this are null and void under our and any other system of law that civilized man respects. Therefore, all of these witnesses, and this is what I told each and every one of them, you are free to speak with impunity, and if anyone challenges you on that level, give me a jingle, here's my cell phone number, and here's my private number at home, and we'll get on the dance floor. That's the way it is. I told a few of these spooks a few days before the May 9th press conference with the National Press Club. I was at this think tank in Washington, and I had some of these spooks in this conference room with the thing was wired for sound. I don't know who was listening on the other side of these screens. But I had my guess. And I said, if you try to get in our way, I've got lawyers lined up, We've got media people lined up. I have major network news executives who have been in my home, in my basement, holding on to documents. And what they were waiting for you to do is move against us. Make a move.
Now we're getting somewhere.
This is the only language they understand. Make no mistake about it. Hey, I'm a pussycat, but you don't want to tangle with this pussycat. I'm a lion. And the thing is this. These folks do not respect the rule of law, but they fear the knowledge of the public. They fear that spotlight. That's what we've done. We've had 10 million people on our website. Over 1 billion people heard about what we were doing on May 9th. We have major network executives in major newsrooms studying this issue with us as I speak. We have major members of committees in Congress looking into this, asking us to deliver to them the material, an operational device that shows what a UFO is. And that's what we're going to do this year, I hope. Ultimately, if we feel that this is the right thing to do, we do it. You don't care what the risks are, because the benefits are infinite. I mean, we have the ability. It has been given to our minds and handed off to us for 50, 60, 70 years. The knowledge, the sciences, the technologies, the information, the spiritual vision to create a civilization that is sustainable for thousands of years, that will eliminate poverty and create a world that our forefathers would have only dreamed of. This is like a ripened fruit ready to land into our hands. We've got to put it out there and carry it over. It is time for us to do this. It should have been done in the 50s. An opportunity presented itself then, and there was extraterrestrial involvement with some of the people in our governments wanting us to get this thing done and resolve these problems. But we turned our backs, and instead of putting an outstretched hand, we started shooting them down with electromagnetic weapons and putting weapons in space and doing other things that are too stupid to imagine. A witness who's recently come forward has said that if the people knew how truly horrific some of the things are that have been done by these classified projects, many of them would end up killing themselves over it. Which is why a lot of these guys don't want to talk about everything they know about. It's fearsome and horrific. Now, I know what 500 or so of these insiders know, including some of the core people inside the MJ-12 group. And it's been hard for me to live with. But the only thing that keeps me on the path that I'm on is the vision that we have collectively created for an alternate reality, one that diverts the world from the path it's on, which is cataclysmic, and creates a world that will be sustainable. There's a wonderful Chinese quote, expression that I like to use, and it says, unless we change directions, we're likely to end up where we are going. I love those Chinese expressions, and it's so true. But no one is looking at where we're headed. We've lost half of the polar ice cap on the northern hemisphere. We have lake up on the North Pole. We're losing huge parts of Antarctica. The Great Lakes, the average temperature of the Great Lakes has risen 20 degrees in 25, 30 years. We have a serious problem with deforestation, desertification, the growth of deserts all over the world. And yet, we're not changing anything. There's this knockdown brag out about having a small increase in fuel efficiency on our vehicles, and they can't even get that through Congress. When in reality, what we're going to have to do, and this is the next big thing, is to put out to the public the energy and propulsion devices that will completely make the internal combustion engine obsolete. It's been obsolete for 50 years. It's time for us to hit the death knell, close that chapter, and open another chapter. To that end, in addition to the disclosure project, moving forward with more of these witnesses' testimony and government documents and corroborating evidence and all the things that we're doing, and we're continuing to do that with media and with members of Congress, I started an entity in the last couple of months called Space Energy Access Systems. Now, what that refers to is not getting energy from outer space, but getting energy from the space around this book. And if this was a correctly configured electromagnetic device, stationary or in motion, it could tap into a field of energy. Some would call it the zero-point field. Others may think it's something else. It doesn't matter what you want to name it, but there is a fluxing, teeming field of energy that surrounds us and is the baseline energy field from which matter and energy is fluxing and appearing. You know, it's all on the level of post-quantum, beyond even the quantum state. But these technologies have existed. People as far back as Tesla have discovered certain effects of it. One of the reasons why this whole UFO issue has been kept secret isn't because they think people are going to throw themselves off the Empire State Building, because we're not alone in the universe. It's because the knowledge of how they got here is in these physics, in this new type of physics, which would enable the world to say adios to your central utilities. You know, you're sending all your money in California to Texas, these big, well, Enron, of course, is big on belly up, but there are a bunch of other guys taking, extracting money. But the thing is that you do not need to have that kind of energy system. And disclosing one discloses the other. You know, this is one thing people haven't figured out until recently. The whole reason to quote UFO, forget the word UFO. Call it an exotic energy and propulsion device. So get rid of the whole mindset around UFO. Just call it an exotic energy and propulsion device, generator. That's what it is. Whether we have made it at Lockheed Martin and SAIC and Northrop, or EG&G and some of these other companies that are working on this, or whether it came from Alpha Centauri, it doesn't matter. The laws of the universe are universal. And the ability to tap into these sort of trans-dimensional energy states and generate real power out of the space around us has been done for a long time by good old Homo sapiens on Earth. And the reason those things have been classified and suppressed and stolen, and people have encountered murder incorporated, as I call it, when they tried to come out with this stuff, it's the same reason the UFO issue has been kept secret. It would change the way the world runs forever. The geopolitical order would be completely transformed. And the concept of how we on this planet live and what our relationship is to other planets would change, and our concept of space and time would change. All these things would change. Because we have been taught the physics and the sciences of kindergarten when we're already in our young adulthood. And it's time that we come over to an understanding commensurate with an adult. I point out to people that if you look at the world today, the massive poverty there is, you also look at the situation where if the 5.4 billion people who live outside of Europe and North America were to have these technologies, they could leapfrog the smokestack era. Just like people in Africa leapfrog linear telephone lines and are using these things. And have an economic renaissance, and in fact, there would be this rapprochement between the first world and the so-called third and fourth world, where there would be this closing of this gap. But what happens? Since only 10% of the world's population is in America and Europe, and the other 90% is elsewhere, this would be the biggest change in geopolitical power in the history of the world, and it will happen in 10 or 20 years. That is what they've been keeping their finger in this crack in the dam for. This fear of that kind of massive change. And yet, if we don't allow and don't manage this change properly and wisely, we're headed for geopolitical and environmental collapse. Now, I have people visit me, not infrequently, from inside these covert programs, and have since the early 90s, who have said, we want this done, but we painted ourselves into a corner, into a box, and can't get it done. We're the ones who are going to do it because they can't, and they won't. They don't have the ability. you know, the webs we weave when we practice to deceive. I'm sort of paraphrasing this, but they caught themselves in their own web. And we're the ones who have to free up the world out of this web that it's been caught in. We can do this if we join together and make some practical steps. Now, space energy access systems, which we call SEAS, S-E-A-S, like the oceans. Our website, by the way, is seaspower.com. A nice double long palm. The seaspower.com, that was just put up 2 or 3 days ago, but it's under construction. You can get on it and see some of what we're doing. And here's what our objective is with that. And I want to summarize it very quickly. There are 3 main phases to what we're doing. This phase, right now, we're already at work in escrow, and we're already funded to do what I'm about to describe in phase 1. And that is to either identify and test independently, improve, and then secure an over unity, an energy device that uses this new physics that creates energy by tapping into this field of energy around us. And if it looks mysterious to you, just think of it this way. You know, we get power from hydroelectric plants. Well, where does that power really come from? It's really transferring gravity and the force of mass falling with gravity over things that turn a turbine, creating electricity. Well, these devices simply create a sink, if you will, into this ambient electromagnetic flux field, this baseline 0 point of energy that's around us and that sustains all matter and energy, and taps into that and it flows. You don't have to pay for the energy. There's no input energy, any more than there's input energy that humans have to put into a hydroelectric dam. We're not buying energy. We're just simply letting that water falling over a gradient using gravity, and really we're transferring gravitational energy into electric power. That's what hydroelectric power is, in a sense. These devices do a very similar thing, but on a sort of electromagnetic and electrogravitic basis, where gravity can also be affected, and therefore you can make things weightless. This is why these UFOs travel at 15,000 miles per hour and make a right-hand turn without decelerating, because they completely correct the mass inertia gravitational field. By the way, we've got a dozen or so air traffic controllers and strategic air command radar people and military radar people who have tracked and seen these UFOs moving exactly as I just described. You should see this archive of testimony. If you can sit down and look at all 120 hours that we have, your mouths would just like, oh my God. This is why this 4 hours, and you can get this now. We didn't have it available to the public earlier, but you get this 4 hours that we've made, or that we've been given to members of the Senate and House. And look at that. It's an astonishing thing to see. But this company in this phase, Seize Power, is looking at really moving these technologies into provable operating system. We're going to do it 2 ways. We're going to either identify and test and prove through clean and sophisticated scientific testing entities an existing system that somebody has. Maybe you have one. Maybe, I don't know. People have these things. They've invented them since the time of Tesla. And they never seem to be able to get them out to the public. That's what we're going to do. Or, and these are not mutually exclusive trajectories, we're going to build one using a brain trust that we've identified of scientists, engineers, fabricators, and we're going to start that process, we hope, in the next 30 days. Now, if we succeed, at the moment that we have 3 independent reports from serious scientific entities that are sophisticated enough to test one of these systems, that shows that 100 watts are going into it, and 3 kilowatts are coming out, or that there's no input power and there's a kilowatt coming out, these things do exist and have existed for decades. Once we have identified one of those and we've made an arrangement with the person who has it, we're going to move into phase 2. Phase 2 is going to be somewhere between $20 and $30 million capitalization, simply to set the stage for disclosing it. Security, intellectual property, going public, PR, political support, regulatory support, military support, national security support, a multi-track strategic plan which is up on our website, that would all be orchestrated. It's like a dozen strategies being orchestrated at once. And then it gets announced to the world. Not until dozens of copies of it have been made, they're working, and they're in the hands of the who's who of the world, including celebrities, supportive political figures, important scientists, and what have you. At that point, the curtain comes back, and we have one of these devices, and there are dozens of them already in the hands of other people, and it goes public, and we hope then to enter into what I call phase 3, which is mass manufacture, distribution, and we'll probably have to do an IPO or something along those lines to raise a few $1 billion. I don't think you're going to have staying power taking on a $5 trillion part of the economy without at least a $2 to $10 billion capitalization. So, and this we hope to do in the next 12 to 18 months. It'll be one of the fastest things you've ever seen. But this is the next big thing. It isn't in Silicon Valley. It's going to be in these energy generation systems. I point out to people a fundamental truth. We think we're so high-tech that we're using lasers and fiber optics and integrated circuits and computers and, supercomputers. But what are they being powered with? Do you know that 57% of the electricity in America is still from coal? Burning coal like we did in the 1700s and 1800s, for God's sakes? I mean, we're still this sort of Rust Age economy halfway into a space age economy. And the reason there's this big gap is because it has been deliberately suppressed in the energy and propulsion areas. Those systems have been deliberately, illegally, and ruthlessly suppressed. Well, I'll tell you this. We get our hands on one of these systems, and we've proven that it's not snake oil. Believe me, there's a lot of snake oil out there. I've tested a couple of them that end up being just a scam. But we find a real McCoy, and that thing's going to be hitched to something that's going to go at light speed out to the public, and it's going to have an extraordinary support group around it. Because what a lot of people don't realize is that the vast majority of people in government and in the military and in the intelligence community want us to succeed. They are furious that they have been lied to about these programs. I have personally briefed a sitting head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. In fact, the current and past heads of the DIA, I have both briefed. The head of the Joint Staff Intelligence, J2. These are people who knew that something was going on, but that they were being left out of the picture. They are our supporters. They're our friends. And so are 99% of the world's population. Yes, there'll be some people who will have to be retooled, and some civilizations that are going to have to find a way of sustaining themselves besides pumping oil up out of the ground. But arguing that this shouldn't happen because it's going to cause some of those sorts of changes is like saying that we should have never invented a computer because Olivetti typewriter would have to declare bankruptcy in Italy like they did last year. I mean, it's a ridiculous argument. Luckily, President Bush and others in Congress have openly stated that it is a matter of national security that we get off foreign oil. And we will use those quotes to put on big PowerPoint things to say, and here's the solution. We already have presidential contenders on both sides of the aisle, ranging from Senator Kerry of Massachusetts to others who are saying, look, we have got to do something about this equation. We cannot stay on this path that we're on. And we already have lines of communications to many of these people in Congress that when we have a real device, a real technology that has been triple vetted, confirmed, and this vetting will be very seriously done, and it shows a consistent result. We will put this in front of these leaders, and we will dare them to hold up the dissemination of this technology. We will expect the chairman of committees that oversee the regulatory agencies to pull them in and cooperate. We have people inside the DOE already who are ready to set this up. We have people inside Navy intelligence ready to help us. We have some people in places that are quite surprising. We have some of the most powerful oil-producing countries wanting to fall in behind this as soon as we disclose it. You'd be shocked if the people want to see this done. As one man that I've been working with, who's the fourth largest oil explorer and engineering firm in the world, said, he's already made his money out of oil. He's concerned with what kind of world he's leaving his grandchildren. This is a man I've worked with for many years. And so what you find is that there's really only a very small group of people. They're the small minority. They're going to have to answer to the people of the world if they get in the way of this thing moving forward. Because we will have a spotlight on it every step of the way. We already have an eminent former ambassador on the board of this corporation. We have a tenured professor of science from a major university on the board. We have access to an extraordinary array of people to support and make this thing happen. And you know who our biggest level of support and protection is going to be? You. If anything happens to us, I want you to promise me that you will raise bloody hell and you'll go to Washington and shut it down. Ultimately, this future of our planet is in our hands. Don't view yourself as a victim that somehow can't fight this huge machine that's out there. You can rage against the machine. I like that band. They're cool. A lot of their lyrics come from my work. Have you seen the new Incubus music? It talks about signaling to UFO with their lighters out on the beach. That's all stuff we've been given to the pop artists that they put into the pop culture. Like Blink-182, you know, the punk rock band, or, you know, Tom DeLonge comes out to the desert with us while we're looking for UFOs and signaling. It's so cool. So we're trying to get it to the pop culture. But there's the mass media and the people who, if they speak, are going to say, wow, this is gnarly. We're going to get this done. And you know what? If some goon comes along and delivers into my hands a Secrecy Act order or a Section 181 of the patent law that says cease or desist or you go to jail for 10 years for each violation of secrecy, which is what they've done to a lot of inventors, I'll say, rip it up in front of a few 100 million people. And I'll say, come take me to jail. And that's where we kick in to the whole legal strategy. And if they want to get into a cat fight, man, they've got it, man. And if they try to whack us, well, we've got equal power on our side now. And I'll tell you a little interesting fact. May 9th was a little canary in the mine shaft. I'm the canary tweeting away. Well, here we come, this big bad wolf, and all these people are out there. We do this, not a single one of these witnesses has even gotten a phone call saying, be quiet or else. None of them, nor have I, not for a number of years. We've got enough things in place on the inside and on the outside, I think, to make this move. And if we don't do it now, when are we going to do it? And if we don't do it, who the hell is? You know, in my night, once upon a time, I hoped and I prayed, God Almighty, someone will do this. Because I didn't want to do it. I don't need to be doing this. I got 4 young children. And, you know, but what you come to realize is that ultimately it is in our laps. And it's this big cosmic hot potato that the who's who in the political structure, they don't want to hold on to it for more than a few minutes. They're going to pass it on. So now it's in our laps. But you, joining with us, I am convinced, can give enough power to this thing to make it happen. You can do it in your prayers, you can do it in your meditations, you can do it through your actions, through your networking, through your voices, through your attempts to get us the support we need, to getting the word out of what we're looking for, finding us more witnesses, finding us the scientists who have these devices who are sitting quivering in their garages, wondering how they're going to get it out to the public. Tie it into us. We'll create the shield and the umbrella around this thing. We'll move it out. who said, you know, we, the royal we, this is an Army intelligence spook, who presents himself as a electronics musician, inventor, producer, but he's Army intelligence, they're everywhere. Anyway, and I was at the Wrigley Mansion in Phoenix at a midnight meeting with this guy who looks like the cigarette man in the X-Files. Where do you think they get these ideas? I know the writers of the X-Files. It's true. Anyway, so I'm sitting there, you know, and I just had this meeting with the head of the CIA, President Clinton's first CIA director. He said, you know, we have paid at least 10,000 people over $10 million apiece to get their cooperation with our project, meaning secrecy. I said, oh, really? I don't care if it's 10 trillion, I'm not interested. He says, well, but other people might be. So here's the way this is going to work. SEAS, Space Energy Access Systems, will not be bought out. The controlling legal authority, now the worst term, but it's the proper one, will not be corruptible. I can't be purchased and I can't be scared off. Period. And that's the way it's going to be. And the scientists working with me know that. And that's why they're joining with us. And they know that we have the protection both from the inside, but from millions of people on the outside. And basically what we have to do, collectively, is decide that this is going to happen come hell or high water. If they have to carry me out with my boots on into a coffin, okay. I'm prepared to do that. And everyone on the board of that operation has told me they are prepared to take a bullet, go to jail if they have to. And because of the stature of the people who are involved, and one man was ambassador to 9 different countries and knows heads of state all over the world and is one of the best friends of the Dalai Lama. It would be very difficult for them to make that kind of move. So then they have to buy us out. They can't tell us off, they have to buy us out. Well, we're not for sale. The money is that I could care less about the money. So here's the deal. You can't buy them all, you can't kill them all. The only thing they can do is try to control the media and others to keep it secret. But you are the ones who are going to prevent that from happening. Because you are the ones who are going to have the loud mouths if this thing starts getting suppressed. And if we produce a proven energy system that is robust enough to run your house or operate your car without fossil fuels, and Ford Motor Company doesn't adopt it, or it doesn't begin to proliferate, it will be your responsibility to raise hell and high water to the other side for not letting it out. You won't let them wiggle off the hook then. All these people talking about the national security of the United States and we need to get off oil. Say, here it is. All the people bellyaching about the environment say, here's the solution. All the people who are complaining about poverty and injustice and mind-numbing unnecessary death in the third world say, here's the fix. Why don't you do something about it? And when they don't step up to the plate, then you hold their feet to the fire. Ultimately, then, the masses of people knowing about this are going to want to be involved at every level. And it is for this reason that at this early stage, very risky, some would say, I'm talking about this openly. You know, I was on Art Bell the other night talking about this. He said, you know, kind of during the show, he says, you know, do you really want to be doing this? And I said, yeah. I don't want to do it from a personal point of view, but it's something we have to do.
Yeah.
And so we're doing it. Spirit has called us to do it. Now, I come from a tradition, you know, my dad was half Cherokee Indian, Native American Cherokee, and I have a twin sister who looks like Native American Cherokee. We don't look anything alike, as you can imagine. Someone once with a PhD asked me if Patricia and I were identical twins. I said, well, there's just one tiny difference. I said, well, not tiny. Anyway. That's from The Birdcage, my favorite movie. And I said, But the bottom line is this, you know, we have to be those warriors, the spirit warriors. We have to be the people who are not going to be turned aside out of fear, intimidation, or corruption. And I will say that I have been honored to work with these incredible people, these witnesses, these scientists, some of whom have gone through hell personally to get this far. And it's a miracle some of them are still alive. Because before we created a disclosure project that has all of you as the people protecting us, in part, they didn't have a way to tell the world what they knew, and they were scared to do it by themselves. But you know, there's secrecy divides people. Openness unites them. And in that united front, you have safety in numbers. You have security, but you also have credibility. You have all these people coming together. So it may be that you won't believe one scientist, but you'll believe 15. Or there may be one air traffic controller, you think he's making this up, but when you see 20 of them in the archive we have of testimony, you go, these things are real, and they've been on radar. And all the debunkers would say, hey, if these things were real, why aren't we tracking them on radar? You say, hey, they've been tracked 20 times by these 20 people, and 100,000 other times by people who aren't here right now. What I would like for you to entertain in your minds is how you can help us. Can you be one of those people who finds the best possible technology for us to put into this umbrella and move out? Can you be the person who finds that military intelligence witness who will help corroborate an account of someone else we're working with? Can you be the person who can help us get an increased level of funding support for the Disclosure Project so that it can film the next 119 witnesses and have another National Press Club event? It's going to cost around $150,000 out of pocket to do that, not counting staff. So all of you can do something, and it's a matter of asking yourself if you can do it. This is how we've gotten this far, so I put this in the laps of us collectively. We collectively have to do this. Now, one of the men who has helped us over the years is a man named Mark McCandlish. He's here with us today. He's a fabulous scientist, an aerospace illustrator whose work has been in Aviation Week and popular science and popular mechanics and other areas. And he's the guy that you've read about in this book, talking about the alien reproduction vehicles that were witnessed by a group of people that he has been working with for some years. And he has courageously spoken the truth and is going to be joining forces with us to get this information and these technologies out to the public. I'd like for you to welcome Mark McCandlish. Turn it on.
What makes machines work? And because of that, I became very curious about what made these things that people were seeing in the sky, what made them work, because they obviously appeared to be machines of one kind or another. In 1967, during a major UFO flap across the United States, I watched a sphere-shaped UFO hover over a nuclear weapons storage facility at a SAC base, Fuji Air Command base in Chicopee, Massachusetts, Westover Air Force Base. And I watched that for about 10 minutes and watched it drift off, and then it shot away at high speed. And it just seemed really strange to me that there was a machine out there that did those kinds of things. I'd say about 5-6 years later, I went into the Air Force to work on F-106s, radar and weapons control systems. So I built up a bit of an electronics background while having fun working around airplanes. I went to school at a design college in Pasadena called Art Center College of Design, and wanted to become the next great Corvette designer for Chevrolet. And then the bottom fell out of the automotive industry, so I went to work for General Dynamics. And after a couple of years of doing that, I began freelancing for a lot of different defense contractors because I found that I could make a lot more money that way. In the course of doing that, I started doing illustrations for a number of magazines like Popular Science and Popular Mechanics. And after publishing a a story in November of 1988. Popular Science magazine told me they'd received a call from an old friend of mine from college, and he eventually called me. We got together. We were going to go to an air show at Norton Air Force Base on November 12, 1988. Now, if you go back and you look at the chronology of that time frame, you'll find that this was about 2 to 3 weeks before they released the first grainy photographs of the F-117A Nighthawk, or stealth fighter, and the first rather lousy artwork of what eventually became known as the Northrop B-2 stealth bomber, or flying wing. But during the course of that air show, which at the last minute I was unable to attend, this friend of mine, Brad Sorensen, was escorted in the company of a former Undersecretary of Defense into a very large hangar at this base, Norton Air Force Base in San Bernardino, California. It's down in Southern California, about 70 miles east of Los Angeles. And when he came back the following week and described what he had seen, he couldn't really explain how shocked he was at what he'd seen there. There had been an array of different high-technology aircraft, more or less conventional in their power. There was the losing competitor in the B-2 bomber competition, which was an aircraft that had been built by Lockheed and Rockwell International's North American Aircraft Division. And it looked surprisingly like the mock-up that Honda used in its introductory commercials for the CRX. They said they had their own little black project, and they had this little hatchback driving under a black flying wing. Well, that's kind of what the Lockheed version looked like. But in addition to that, he said that in an adjoining section of the hangar, there were 3 flying saucers hovering off the floor. And over the following 6 months, I managed to, little by little, squeeze a number of details out of Brad as to what these things looked like, what the general proportions were, what the components looked like, what they were called, what the function was. And eventually I took all this material and, using my skills as a draftsman and an illustrator, was able to do a cutaway drawing of all the components that I could explain. And I made a blueprint of this and I sent it to Brad. And he called me on the phone. He says, "Mark, if you're smart," he says, "you'll tear this thing up and you'll throw it away and you'll never show it to anybody, because," he said, "it's the most dangerous illustration you've ever done in your life." He said, "It is exactly the way that aircraft looks like, or that vehicle, that alien reproduction vehicle." And it's the same diagram. I believe there's a reproduction of that drawing, reduced in size without the call-outs, explaining what the different parts are, that's in the Disclosure Project publication book. But anyway, then, once and for all, I knew that these, in fact, were machines of one kind or another. I really wasn't spending too much time dwelling on the issue of whether aliens are coming here from other star systems. I kind of accepted that that must be the case, although I think that most of the UFOs that we see around the United States, I'd say 85% of them are probably classified aircraft of one kind or another. But I do believe a small percentage are probably aircraft or vehicles that come from other star systems. But as a hot rodder, and as somebody who's interested in how machines work, I became more and more curious about figuring out, how does this thing work? And so I began researching different patents and scientific papers. And there were a few things that Brad had said about what made this thing work and how it was able to levitate without jet engines and all this kind of stuff, that convinced me that there was a new type of technology involving something called zero-point energy that made it work. It'd be probably a little bit too complicated for me to go into it now and explain it to you, but essentially everything that you see around us, everything materially that you see in the universe is made up of atoms. And those atoms are made up of smaller subatomic particles, like electrons, and the electrons spin around the atoms. Well, nobody has ever stopped to ask the question, what keeps those electrons spinning? What keeps them going all the time? And it turns out, if you kind of reduce all the physical equations and everything down to these papers, you find that it's this so-called zero-point energy that Dr. Greer had been talking about, earlier. So, anyway, to go on from there, I eventually met a fellow at another air show in 1992 at Edwards Air Force Base, who apparently was a fellow who had been a crew chief working for a fellow that I knew who was an editor at Aviation Week. Space Technology is a trade journal for the aerospace industry. And we were talking about some of the things that had happened during the Persian Gulf War, and the fact that I had talked to a number of people who'd come back from the Persian Gulf War, who'd been Marines on ships in the Persian Gulf and that sort of thing, who'd seen UFOs zipping around above the area of the Persian Gulf War. And this individual who I was talking to kind of nodded and smiled as though he knew what I was talking about. And then I said, well, I also heard that they were using some of these large triangular stealth airships or stealth blimps for surveilling and targeting some of the places in Iraq that the stealth fighters went in to bomb. And he said, yeah, that's true. And so then I thought I'd really take a big leap, and I said, well, I've also heard a rumor that there's a saucer over at the North Base facility over there at the north end of the dry lake bed where they land the space shuttle. And he smiled and he says, yeah, that's true. And I said, well, how do you know? He says, because I've seen it. I said, well, when? He said in 1973. And I said, well, what were the circumstances? And he says, well, the person that you and I both know works for Aviation Week, used to be a test pilot here. And he said, I was a crew chief working on his plane at the time. And he said, I was told to go over to North Base and pick up a defective ground power unit for one of the aircraft there. And because I was just a kid, and because I knew I could go home as soon as that one particular assignment was done, and I was working late at night, he says, instead of driving around the perimeter highway to the gate for North Base, he says, I just cut straight across the dry lake bed, assuming that the guards would see me well in advance, but they didn't. So he drove up onto the tarmac at North Base and pulled up in front of the first hangar he saw with some open doors, and sitting inside the hangar was this flying saucer. And I said, well, what did it look like? And he said, well, it was flat on the bottom, it was kind of cone-shaped around the base. He said then there was a little ledge and a dome on top, and there were like little glass bubbles on top of it with like a camera inside each one. And I said, wait a minute, let me borrow your pen. So he took a piece of paper, I drew a drawing, and I said, did it look like this? He says, oh, you've seen one. I said, no, I've never seen one, but I have a friend who has. And that was when I knew that my friend Brad had actually seen something that exists. So then, an associate of mine wrote a letter down to retired Colonel Wendell Stevens in Tucson. He has something called the Ufo Photo Archives. And we sent him this drawing and said, do you have anything in your archives that looks like this? And he sends his letter back and he says, yes, we do. In fact, here's a photograph that was taken in 1967 near Provo, Utah, by a military pilot, and it looks identical to the ARV. Well, a few years later, I think it was 1993 or 94, I encountered a pickup truck in a parking lot with a bumper sticker on the back that said, they're here, with a UFO in the picture. So I waited for the guy to come out of the post office, and I said, are they? He says, yeah, but you wouldn't believe me if I told you where I saw it. So I told him my story about Brad and the ARV. He says, okay, I'll tell you where I saw it. He says, I work at the B-2 bomber production facility at Plant 42 in Lancaster. And he said, I smoke cigarettes, and since they passed that new law where you can't smoke inside federal buildings, I have to go outside to smoke. He says, one of the things about Plant 42 is that any time there's going to be a classified aircraft that's going to come in and land, or one that's going to take off, the sheriff's department comes out and they block off all the surrounding streets so nobody can see the classified aircraft. And he says, I noticed that the sheriffs were all around the complex blocking off the streets. The thing about Lancaster is that it gets all the pollution from Los Angeles. So at night, when all the city lights are on, the sky kind of glows sort of a dull reddish orange. And you can actually see dark black aircraft flying around silhouetted against this dull glow. And he said that while he was out smoking a cigarette, he noticed that all the lights on the Lockheed Skunk Works building had been extinguished, and that there was a circle of vehicles sitting outside the hangar in front of the big bypass doors. And he said that it looked like a series of those little vehicles that the linemen used to work on the high-powered electrical lines, where there's like a basket that the guy rides up and he has controls. And from each of these 10 or 12 vehicles in a circle, there was a tarp that went all the way around, like a little circular area. And then he noticed that hovering above this circle of vehicles, about 500 feet above the ground, silhouetted against the smog, was this large, lens-shaped disc hovering there silently. And he said that he then saw the vehicle drop down into this cluster of vehicles, the arms from these vehicles extended out, and covering it. The whole thing trundled into the hangar. The doors closed, the lights came on, and the sheriff's deputies left. A week later, and he mentioned that he was smoking a lot more cigarettes after that. He said a week later, he says, about the same time in the evening, middle of the week, the sheriff showed up, pulls off all the streets, the lights of the Skunk Works building go off, the doors open, out trundles this package of vehicles with this big black tarp over it. The arms all stand up, making this big black circular thing. And after about 10-15 minutes, this thing silently rises up out of the group of these vehicles. And after a short interval, the vehicle then just goes, said the Skunk Works building was a good 2/3 of a mile from where I was standing. And he says, I could see it clearly. And he said, this vehicle, without making a noise, without a sonic boom, went the length of the field, passed me, and disappeared in the dark in under a second and a half. Just like that, with no noise. And he says, my whole view of physics changed in that moment. Now, I've had that same experience. I've seen these vehicles in operation, and I honestly couldn't tell you whether they were ours or somebody else's, but I've seen them on more than one occasion, making maneuvers at well over 5,000 miles an hour, covering 7 miles of airspace, making right-angle turns, making another right-angle turn, and going up through a canyon, probably on the way to Edwards Air Force Base. And this was in December of 1989. And I've seen them several times since then. But the thing is that the technology exists. And if you can move through the atmosphere of this planet at something over 5,000 miles an hour without producing a sonic boom, you have to realize that the fact that there's no shock wave, there's no sonic boom, even when a vehicle is silent, it should make a sonic boom. Just like if you were target practicing with a rifle on the range, and you shoot very close to the ground, you'll see the sand flicker. If that bullet travels faster than the speed of sound, it creates a little miniature sonic boom, just like a plane does. So when you see a vehicle going through the sky and not producing a sonic boom, it means that the propulsion system that's moving that vehicle through the air is altering the mass of the air around it, as well as the mass of the vehicle itself. And that's why they're able to make these dramatic turns without killing the pilot or destroying the vehicle, is because the mass of the vehicle is being reduced. Now, why does that happen? No, I'll wrap it up because I know you want me to finish here, but if zero-point energy is what gives all of our atomic structure in this universe its mass and the effect of gravity and inertia, and there are papers that substantiate this. If you have a way of tapping that zero-point energy as a power source, it means that it's not there to continue reacting with the atomic structure, and so the mass is reduced. If the mass is reduced, then it could go faster. And the faster you go through space-time, the more of this energy is available. That's why Einstein said you can never go faster than the speed of light, because as you accelerate through space-time, your mass increases. It increases because the amount of zero-point energy you encounter actually increases the effect of mass. So you can never have enough energy to push yourself along. But in a sense, if you know how to tap the energy, and it's no more difficult than using a photocell to tap sunlight. If you know how to do it, it's simple. The technology exists, and I'm prepared to work with Dr. Greer and his associates to try and bring the technology out so we can really demonstrate that it exists, and perhaps get some of these people who've been saying that it's baloney to fess up. So.
Someone want to take this because I don't need it. I realize we handed off the baton, which was a nice symbology, but I don't need it. There you go. You can turn it off with this buzzing. Interestingly, this buzzes bug me. I hate fluorescent lights too, by the way. They're terrible for you. They deplete your vitamins and anyway, imagine the world we can create then with these kinds of technologies. Surface roads. We're burying all our fertile cropland under all these. We don't need surface roads. Energy generation. Imagine being able to have a device no bigger than this podium, much smaller, that could run your house without any input power from a utility company, not burning any fossil fuels. Imagine what the villages around the world who are cutting down the rainforest and make charcoal to cook their food could do with technologies like that for clean water, agriculture, light manufacturing, zero effluent, zero pollution, desalinization at no cost. Even the deserts shall bloom, I think it says in the Bible. We have the ability to create that world. That future was hijacked before I was born, before many of us were born. So it's just time for us to take it back. And it's time for us to determine that this is long enough for that dangerous game to be played. Now, the most dangerous game being played, beyond that of even the environmental problem, is the fact, if y'all could take the conversation outside, because I want to listen to that. Sir, hello? Hello? I'm very old-fashioned about such things. I was raised in the South in an old Southern family. These technologies are not that difficult to create. But to get it out there is a Promethean task we're all going to have to join to do. The door is open. What I see is a clear path. People aren't being told to shut up. People just have to have the courage to do the right thing. We have, within our ability today, this future that we can create. We can manifest it. And I think that the only thing that's a barrier to it is in our own minds and hearts. We have to clear away our fears. We have to clear away our reluctance. We have to see ourselves clear to a future that we can be proud of to hand off to our children and grandchildren. And we have to begin to think like adults should think. And that all of us between the ages of puberty and senility have as our sacred responsibility shepherding into fruition this new world, this new creation, a civilization that is sustainable and one that is just. The Cherokee tradition is that everything we do should be looking at 20 generations yet unborn. One of Ronald Reagan's National Security Council staffers told me back in 1993 that when he was on Reagan's National Security Council, that long-term planning was 6 months. And unless we change directions, we're going to end up where we're going. I am sincerely convinced that we can do this. But one of the great dangers is doing this with a heart that is clear and a purpose that is clear, that avoids the pitfalls of the past thousands of years of human evolution. What am I talking about? We're not alone in the universe. And whether or not we have these energy devices or anything else, we have to realize the fundamental truth. And I'm an emergency doctor, and I've seen people killed with a butter knife, with a beer bottle. Every technology can be used as a weapon, including these. And the world is going to have to resolve that that cannot happen. There are many barriers to the world that we see becoming a reality. And those barriers are human in design. The biggest one, and the biggest danger, is that we are already using these kinds of advanced weapon systems, basically these technologies that are scalar electromagnetic, anti-gravity, all kinds of things, to target and destroy extraterrestrial vehicles as they approach Earth. I have multiple witnesses to that. They have told me that this is the most stupid and dangerous thing we've ever done. And when I mentioned this to Mrs. Gupta-Scali, the wife of the Secretary General of the United States, she turned as white as a sheet. She says, "Does this really happen?" I said, "I am convinced it is. It is the greatest threat to the future of our planet, because we have a group of people who view in a reactionary and paranoid and a strictly military mindset that which they do not understand, or that which they cannot absolutely control. And because of that, they have created a situation where we are rapidly moving towards the fulfillment of what Wernher von Braun warned Carol Rosin about. Carol Rosin was spokesperson for Wernher von Braun, the rocket scientist, for the last 3 years of his life. And he said on his deathbed, he says, you know, we're going to have the Cold War. That'll be followed by rogue states and global terrorism. Now, we have this in testimony before 9/11. He says that then that will be followed by the ultimate trump card they're going to play. They're going to hoax an alien threat. And they will justify a multi-trillion-dollar space weapons buildup centered on not any defensible human need, but on the need to create a new enemy. Back in 1993, I had a meeting at Lawrence Rockefeller's ranch, the JY Ranch out in the Tetons, with a bunch of spooks. And I went from there with my military, 2 of my military advisors, to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where they sent the remains from the Roswell event, some of these other devices back in the 40s and 50s, before they got Area 51 up and going, and the Utah facilities up and going, and the Edwards facilities up and going, and the Fort Huachuca facilities up and going. Fort Huachuca is key. But the Army Intelligence Headquarters near the Mexican border outside Tucson, near Tombstone, how appropriate. You know, dead extraterrestrials stored underground there, at least there were a few years ago. But Wright-Patterson, we had a meeting set up by the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff for me to brief the head of the Foreign Aerospace Science and Technology Center, FASTIC, which had been FTD, Foreign Technology Division. And it's currently called the National Air Intelligence Center. They keep changing their name for a reason. And I met with them, and it was a very cordial meeting, and the head of that, Colonel Canola, was there, and Bruce Ashcroft was there, and a few other people we stayed in touch with. And I said, you know, look, I already know what you have here. I'm not asking you to tell me anything that, you know, that you feel you can, but I'm here to give you some information and to provide a briefing to you, which is what I do. I mean, you have to. And one of the men asked me, I think the colonel asked me, he says, well, what if these things were a threat to the national security? Could they be a threat to national security? security. I said, well, you got the ability to travel through interstellar space, and your civilization is some 250,000 or 100 million or however many years ahead of ours. If they were hostile, this jackpot would have been terminated in the 1940s when we started playing around with nuclear weapons and had the intent to begin to go into space. The fact that you and I are still breathing the free air of Earth is the first and most irrefutable proof that these other civilizations are not hostile as we think of hostility. It doesn't mean that they're happy with our hostility or that they're complacent with our adventuresome nature with weapons of mass destruction in space. Could it be that the Earth is this beautiful crucible of life, and in a sort of a womb where intelligent life is to evolve, but that to leave this womb and emerge into the larger universe, we have to first reach a stage of maturity where we vow to live together in peace and where we leave our weapons behind us, because otherwise we become a threat to the universe. I have had more than one insider tell me, we're the problem, we're the threat. We have to look in the mirror, fix what's wrong with that before we can go too far out there, or we'll be tossed back like a bad penny. I think that we have to look at this then with a larger view. What kind of future are we going to have, not just for 20 generations yet unborn, but I am here to tell you that we have entered into what I think is pretty close to a 500,000-year cycle of unbroken peace, prosperity, growth, and enlightenment. And that cycle opened about 100 and some years ago. And that we're on this pathway where we're trying to find how to get into this stage of maturity as a people. But we're running out of time to do this safely, because there are those madmen and mad scientists in black little projects that have fearsome technologies that are being used in reckless and dangerous ways, which are a threat not only to our national security, but to world security, and in fact, the continuation of the human race. This is the single biggest threat in the history of our species, and it has happened because good people have not been able to do the right thing. When I lived in Israel for a number of years back in the 70s, my first daughter was born there. I shared an apartment complex with a number of survivors with Auschwitz and Dachau and some of the concentration camps. And, they said, well, what the Nazis did wasn't so surprising. There have always been people who hate us. But what broke our hearts were the people, our neighbors, our friends, who looked the other way as they put our children into the boxcars. All of us, no matter what our intentions are, it means nothing if we don't act. It isn't enough to just pray and to meditate and to think good thoughts. That's wonderful. But we have to act. And if there is some risk involved, so what? That's what it means to be an adult. To leave a world better than the one we were brought into. But to do the right thing for those who live on the earth and suffer unnecessarily, and who are going to be born into this world, and who wish to evolve in this world. And so, when people ask me, am I afraid for my safety, I always answer, no. Never have been, not in 12 years. I've had reason to be if I was the kind of person who could be frightened by such things. But fear only has the power we give it, and hope and goodness is infinite. So to the extent that we manifest these things in our lives, we will create that good future awaiting us. And you can see it in your mind, but then act with us, reach out with us to manifest it. Because the world we can create is the following. A world that within 20 to 40 years will totally abolish all poverty as we know it. The average work week will be around 15 to 20 hours. There will be no pollution either from manufacturing, effluent, smokestacks, or in the waterway because of these technologies. We will have no shortages of energy. Micro-agricultural systems will proliferate where you can have in every village or even in your neighborhood in a totally self-contained environment to grow whatever you want under automated systems using energy that costs zero. Imagine the world we could create. And this is not Pollyanna. This is not something that's science fiction. These are technologies that we have had that have come through the minds of men and have been shown to us also by other beings for over 50 or 60 years. And yet we wallow in poverty, and we do this because we haven't acted together to make a difference. Don't give more power to these boogeymen than they have. Much of it is a paper tiger. Doesn't mean they don't have real teeth and that they haven't killed people and they haven't done some gnarly stuff. But they have the power we have allowed them to seize. Not S-E-A-S, S-E-I-Z-E. And seize power in the Disclosure Project intend to take that future, which is the God-given right of the people of the earth to have this good future, and make it real. Yeah. So empower yourself to do this. Don't leave yourself out of this big process. Do what you can to help us, and you will find that the doors will open in front of you, as they have in front of us. There's an unseen hand, and there's a wind blowing in our sails. And if we put ourselves in the direction of the universal will, we'll have a good future that awaits us. God bless you. Thank you very much. If people want to hang around and for asking question and answer, I'll hang around for that. I know it's late for those of you who got here for the film. If you want to hang around till after I do questions, I'll sign any books or tapes if you want to get out there and have a chance to chat. There is a mic. I hope will be on in a minute, so if you have a question, no speech, just ask a question, please, and we'll move on to the next person so we get as many answers as possible.
I'm not sure. You just check it out.
Shout it out and I'll retweet it.
Okay, you can stay on the phone.
If you want.
No, please use the mic. Use the mic. I'll take it off. Bring the mic up.
Bring the mic up.
Hello, hello.
Let's see.
Okay, just repeat the question.
Just tell me how.
Okay. I guess a common question is kind of both. The hemp, the legalization of hemp and this energy movement, there's a few parallels that I draw, where hemp can bring us a lot of natural resources, medicine, energy, and clothing, rope, all the other elements that are good for.
I'm afraid I can't hear your talk, so you can ask the question.
Okay, so do you see a parallel between the hemp movement?
He's asking if I see a parallel between the hemp issue and this. Well, there are a number of, there are a lot of things, whether it's in suppressed medicine or hemp or what have you, and certainly there is. I mean, special interests are very powerful. And I hate to say it, but one of the things we're going to have to do is have our own special interest, except the special interest is the interest of the people of the world. And so this is why our view is to get this thing going, get it capitalized, bring in enough funds that we can have the influence we have to have in Washington. Now, this is about power being shifted from where it is now, which is in corrupt systems that are protecting whatever it is, whether it's hemp or whether it's petroleum or oil or what have you. And we have to figure out a way to get around that. Now, the main way it's going to happen is people understanding how critically important this is. Providing the proof, providing the technology, but then you are going to have enough support sophistication to be able to go to Washington and have enough influence. All right, traditional hard-nosed influence to get the people on the right committees in the regulatory areas to make a pathway for these things. And I hate to say it, but even with the disclosure project thing we did a few months ago, we had people who were from congressional offices, from chief of staff or senators saying, this is great, and I don't doubt this is true, but how much money can you give the senator's re-election campaign? anything.
Right.
I'm not kidding you. You know, you see these cartoons with the Capitol Dome in Washington with the dollar sign on it. I mean, it is totally about that. It is corrupt beyond belief. But unfortunately, that's the way the game is played. And so a lot of it just has to be a very sophisticated strategy. And yes, there are a number of parallels. But the solution is going to not just be one strategy.
Right.
It's not a political strategy versus a public strategy versus a PR strategy versus a covert strategy versus a business strategy. This issue is such a big nut to crack that you're going to have a very large strategy that, sort of a meta strategy that involves various components of it. And I think this is why a lot of the things never really change, is that people don't think system-wide.
Right.
So we're trying to think very systemically and holistically on how to get this thing done. Yes, sir.
Greer, what I've heard you describe here is a vision for the technology, the use of that, the application of it, which I think is wonderful, it's great. What I don't hear you addressing, which concerns me, is that's making a presumption that everybody has accepted, A, the aliens and the technology is out there. I think we need to talk about how we're going to deal with them in terms of the relationship, how that's going to affect our views of religion, social systems, and it's like you're leapfrogging over what's going to be the major issue that people have yet to even wrap their brains around.
He's asking about dealing with, hello, are we on? Is this on?
Yes.
Are you hearing me?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, anyway, he's asking about, that I haven't addressed some of the issues like the effects on religion and all this different thing. In an hour and a half, you can only address so many things. If you read the book, both books, you'll find that these issues are addressed very well. And we've already been doing briefings. When I was with Monsignor Balducci, whose testimony is in this book, Disclosure, who's a Vatican insider and very close to the Pope. I was at his apartment overlooking St. Peter's Basilica, and what I found was that he told me this off camera, he says he couldn't be telling me what he did on camera without the Pope saying so. There are a lot of people who are ready to acknowledge that we're not alone and that we need to go forward peacefully with these issues. And even the theologians within the Vatican and other quarters are talking about this stuff. I think what's lacking is a cogent leadership, and it's the leadership vacuum here, because the people who we normally expect to lead on these issues, such as our political leaders, our academic leaders, what have you, are in their own little boxes. So we're going to have to create our own leadership, and that's what we're doing. Now, all these issues can be articulated. It's not that they're all going to be all that easy, but except for some really retrograde philosophical and theological perspectives, I have not found in my conversations with whether it's Buddhists or Baha'is or Christians or Jews or people at the Vatican or Billy Graham, that people have a problem with the idea that we're not alone in the universe. In fact, all of them say, well, it just adds to the glory of God that the universe is teeming with intelligent beings, and why would he put all of his hope in us here on this one little planet? So I think that we have a whole series of challenges, and I think all of them can be addressed, and we have developed white papers on many of these, the environment, military, political, religious, and we have those things. And these things have been thought through, by the way, since the 50s with Battelle Memorial Institute and others that have done research papers, the RAND group. I think that the big problem is that people think there's a bigger problem than there is. And what I have found, when I've done meetings with the National Science Foundation deputy director, or one of the directors of NASA that we met with, or with theologians at the Vatican, or what have you, is that it's almost like it's a mirage. I mean, there's less of a problem than you can imagine, people accepting this, and also dealing with it within their paradigm. And so the other irony here is that there's over 50% of the population in this country think that these objects are real and that the government is probably lying to them. 2/3 of the population believe it likely that there's intelligent life in the universe. Whether or not they got here or not, they're not sure about. There's so much confusion on the subject. But so it's not that difficult a thing to get across if you rely on government documents and evidence and testimony and materials and what have you. And I think the big problem is addressing this larger issue of how do we explain this to people so that it makes sense to them. And this is what I try to do, depending on what the audience is. But there's no question, we have people who could explain this to a group of theologians without a problem, to a group of physicists without a problem, to a group of political believers without a problem.
What about Middle America?
And Middle America is already there. I mean, the majority of Americans,
Not in my house.
well, that may be true, but I'm just saying that more people, for example, the word UFO has a higher name recognition in America than the U.S. president. They've done studies. It's also true that there are more people who think UFOs are real and the government's been hiding something than voted for any of the past presidents since Reagan. But none of them have gotten absolute majorities. Never mind, only half the people vote. So half of a half is 25%. I mean, 25%. About a quarter of the voting public have been electing our president since Reagan. So the fact of the matter is you have more people who accept this information than have voted for any president since the 80s. And so I don't think that that is the most difficult thing to do so long as you stick to the facts and try to avoid as much of the conjecture as possible. And I think that the facts, if you have corroborating insider witness testimony, corroborating documents, radar tapes, landing trace cases, scientific evidence, stuff like Peter Sturrock has put together at Stanford, stuff like the Cometa report in France put together. These are all the materials we have when we do these big briefings. It becomes very clear to people. What you do have to overcome, though, is a massive disinformation machine. You know, I have documents from the 50s from the CIA talking about their psychological warfare unit dealing with this and how they were going to have Disney Studios make cartoons about flying saucers and aliens so that it would be ridiculed and would make it a topic non grata. And so, and after 50 years of that kind of chicanery, you do have, I tell people, we are climbing Mount Everest, not from base camp, but from 20,000 leagues under the sea, because there have been all these decades of lies and disinformation and spin and ridicule. And many of the military men I'm working with have told me point blank. I know that Major George Filer, who was the deputy director of the 21st Air Force Intelligence Unit at McGuire Air Force Base in 1978 when an extraterrestrial was shot and killed on the tarmac, and his testimony is in the book and in the tapes, and he said the absolute ridicule of this subject and the fear of being laughed at by one's peerage is what's kept a secret at this point, more than anything, because they did such a great job of ridiculing and disinforming the public on it. And the more academic you are, and the more of a bonehead you are at Berkeley or at Harvard or UVA, where I am, University of Virginia, the more you're going to think, oh, I'm too sophisticated to be taken in by such gullible contract. I have a family member who was the city editor of the Boston Globe, who wouldn't touch this story because she said, doesn't matter whether it's true or not, you can put a dead ET on my table. I wouldn't run this story because it's only done by the National Enquirer, and I'd be laughed out of town by my peerage. So the ridicule factor is a huge one. This is why, with what we're doing at this phase, we're trying to really stick to very credible aerospace people, military people, colonels, brigadier generals, all kinds of folks, because we really feel that even though you can go into some really wild areas on this subject, that people need to get the basic facts down first. And this is why we feel the next level of that disclosure is putting out in front of the public a machine that they can buy and test and do what they want. Yes, sir.
Other than supporting the disclosure project with money and being part of the knowing this disclosure, what can we do when we go home today? What can we do in our personal lives to further these changes? What's the most effective way to be a big mouth?
He's saying, what's the most effective way to make these changes? A good question. What can you do aside from donations and networking? Well, you know, if you get on the internet, you can refer everyone you know to the website and say, look, you need to read this stuff and find out this is true. You may think it's science fiction, but it isn't. You need to start having the courage to talk about this with your peers. Now, you know, I'm a medical doctor, and it's not like I was a psychiatrist or something like John Mack. I'm like emergency doctor taking care of children dying in my hands and stuff. And it took a lot of courage for me to step out of the closet on this subject. But what I found was that when I started to do it, I'd have surgeons pull me aside and say, you know, when I was in the Air Force, we saw one of these things while we were out one night, blah, blah, blah. And then I started having the chief of the medical staff wanting me to do medical grand rounds on flying saucers. I kid you not. what I found was that there's like this blanket of ridicule, but if you step forward and speak intelligently and factually, and I tell people, memorize the testimony, the dates, the facts, the figures, memorize the government documents. That's what I do. And so, you know, if I step into a meeting, someone tries to refute it, if I get some debunker like James Oberg wanting to debate, I said, let's do it. I said, I gotta, you know. So what you can do is open up the knowledge base by learning it first yourself to everyone you know. And having the courage to do it, not in a way that's proselytizing, but when the issue comes up, you just tell them. I'll tell you a little story. I was flying one time from the East Coast to San Francisco to come out here to meet with some folks up in Pacific Heights. It was Gordon Getty's people and then Larry Ellison and all these people. I do a lot of these sort of little salons with sort of these Uber movers and shakers. A lot of times they won't know who I am until I get there, because otherwise nobody would come. And you do these, what they call salon, it's a lovely dinner party, and you know, butlers are there, and you have the who's who of the West Coast sitting there at the table. And on the way out there, sitting beside me was the senior economist for the Federal Reserve Board, and who was best friends with Paul Volcker and also Alan Greenspan, and has lunch with them several times a week. And she turned to me, she says, and we were just having a nice chat, conversation, and I got enough to rated in first class with like 5 cents. I said, give me these free little coupons, and I was sitting beside this sort of mover shaker out of Washington. And she says, well, why are you going to San Francisco? And I said, well, I'm meeting with some folks up in Pacific Heights, up on Broadway, to talk about extraterrestrial intelligence and classified energy and propulsion systems that need to be disclosed. And she looked at me, she said, are you serious? I said, yes. She says, well, is that real? I said, yes. And so I opened up my briefcase and gave her all these government documents, and I had these photographs I traveled with that are these gnarly, crystal clear photos. And she was going, oh my gosh. She says, well, will you do a briefing for us? I said, sure. She says, well, send to this little private address at the Federal Reserve all your materials so I can hand it off to Alan Greenspan. I said, okay, I will. So we did. So, look, you know, everything, I mean, in the universe, if you put, here's something I always tell people, if you put yourself in service, the universe will open the door to guide you to what you should be doing. And that's what I have found.
The microphone is working. Technology has healed us. I'm a practicing engineer. I hold 3 Master of Science degrees. 2 of them are from MIT. And I have a lot of friends in the academic community and in industry. Although there's a large fraction that are sort of ignorant about this subject, I have enough friends who are doing alternative science research to tell a repeating story where they attempt to get DARPA funding or DOD funding or NSF funding for alternative science projects that they have credible reasons for believing in. And they say they're just hard as hell to get funded. And I want your reaction as to whether you see that as part of a conspiracy or part of a control of finance from these funding agencies, or whether it's just normal incompetency that some of these leading edge researchers are not being funded.
Well, I think that both have happened, actually. I think there are a lot of people who have sort of half-baked theories, and they seem too far out. The other thing is that science is very political. And, you know, if you start moving, it's like what happened with so-called cold fusion. Well, now, you know, there was a Sunday Times article last week that this has been reproduced at Oak Ridge and other places, tabletop apparent fusion with byproducts occurring by multiple independent laboratories. But the problem is that much of what happens in science has nothing to do with whether it's true or not. It's what the political buzz is. And so if the political buzz isn't there to support something, or there's somebody who's going to intervene and stop it, it isn't going to happen. And on this subject, it becomes very difficult. And just talking about these sort of energy and propulsion breakthroughs, I can tell you that a Department of Energy official that I'm working with, who deals a lot with these kinds of grants and things, said that he was at a meeting with the head of ONR, also Naval Research, an admiral, who said bluntly, my main job is to protect the status quo of the world's energy system, oil. And that's what he said at this meeting, closed meeting. And the guy was stunned because they were bringing up some of these things. This is the man I'm working with. He was bringing in the fact that they'd been to Russia and found this anti-gravity mass reduction thing that Godin and others did. If you're familiar with Godin's work and others. But basically what happened is that you got to this situation where you can bring something so far and then it gets killed by someone stepping in. So I think in cases where legitimate proposals have been killed, it's because there are powerful vested interests that don't want these things to go public. The other danger, of course, with that is if they did fund it, they'd own it. They would classify it. They'd know what you were doing. And that's why we're not going that route. We won't go that route for well into phase 2 or 3, where we have the ability to let the whole world know what happened. Then we'll say to people in the government, if you'd like to throw some grant money in this direction, now's a good time to do it, because then it'll be a fait accompli. But you have to get the political, the mass support, and the media covering this thing. Now, there's a major TV news anchor that I met with who has said that as soon as we have one of these devices ready to show, they will do it. And it's one of the big 3 networks, and it's news. It's not one of their documentaries, so it'll happen.
Good afternoon. I just wanted to add to the media issue that I was shocked to see that your May 9th, 2001 news conference got no coverage in the New York Times, and the only major newspapers that I could find to mention it all did it in a purely satiric fashion, the Washington Post.
And the Washington Times was the exception.
And I did not see that.
You may have a copy of that. They usually have copies of that. It's a very interesting point he's making about the media. I remind you, I don't know if you know a guy named Daniel Sheehan who lives in the area here. He's an attorney who's been working with us. And Daniel Sheehan, when he did the Pentagon, we did Iran-Contra, he did the Stiltwood case, the 3 Mile Islands case, he did the Greensboro KKK case, he was involved with the Pentagon Papers. And when he was involved with the Pentagon Papers in the New York Times, he personally saw a document. I have him on videotape saying this. I got his testimony. I'm treating him like a witness because he also saw some secret Air Force files that showed crashed extraterrestrial vehicles they were retrieving. And Daniel Sheehan told me that this document he saw back when he was dealing with the Pentagon Papers listed 43 names that had been blackened out, that were major figures within the world media elite who were on the payroll of various intelligence agencies. He personally saw this document. And so there's this enormous naivete in the public that somehow we have a free press. I can tell you on the really important issues, America's press is no more free than Communist China's. That's sad.
If I may ask a question, I have one relating to fuel cell technology. About a month ago, W announced a program to put $1 billion or $2 billion a year into that technology for the next 20 years, the idea of producing something that could power an automobile. It seems easy to imagine that he and his good friends in the energy industry have decided that this is the next new thing that they can make a profit from. Well, the question is, does this seem like a technology that you need to bring into this dialogue and program?
Well, it's interesting about the fuel cell debate. It's another way of, it's still sort of a combustion process. It's still something very limited in power. It would require tremendous centralized control over it. I'm very skeptical of what the real agenda is there. I think that it's what I call a temporizing measure. By temporizing, I mean, we can roll this out rather than bringing out the real solution. And I think that unfortunately, it's very easy to set up what I call a decoy technology or a decoy thing to create that everyone, like lemmings, jump over that cliff. When in reality, the solution is going to be these sort of things. This is why I'm very convinced that what we're trying to do is going to require such a huge capitalization because we're probably going to have to purchase the media. In other words, you're going to have to purchase full-page ads in the New York Times. You're going to have to purchase airtime on the major networks. You're going to have to purchase, Newsweek front interpage informational ads. you're going to have to do this and do it relentlessly, and maybe even purchase a network or some kind of a radio or some other network. I think that if you try it now, but remember, let's say we do this and at some point we're ready to go public. And I got some folks lined up to do sort of an IPO structure. I have enough of it. I can reach 25 million people tonight on the radio if I want to. If I say, it's your civic duty to buy 10 shares of this, and we sell 200 million shares, look, there is a way to do this. And what I'm going to say is, however way we're going to do it, we're going to do it. It's like water is going to flow, and there are going to be some big boulders in our way, but we're going to flow around it.
I was wondering about these large boulders. Could you explain about the Majestic 12, maybe its creation or its influence in the shadowy government that you have acknowledged?
Yes, well, I think it's a good question. I wish we had more time to go into that. There's an entire architecture of that group in the first book, Extraterrestrial Contact, that's out there. It's also discussed in this book as well. Basically, what you've got is an infrastructure that evolved in the World War II era, and in post-World War II, it really got out of hand. We brought into this country a lot of Nazis under Operation Paperclip. They became the bedrock of the aerospace and the intelligence community. Systems were put in place, very fascist perspectives were brought in, and by the time Eisenhower came along in the 50s, he found that he was the emperor that had no clothes, and we had people who worked with Brigadier General Stephen Lufkin and others who worked with President Eisenhower, who said that he was extremely frustrated that this secret government within the government, this kind of permanent bureaucracy that had largely been privatized. Remember, the big action isn't in any government agency. It's at Lockheed. It's at special ops at Boeing. It's in the special programs that TRW and EG&G and E-Systems and Raytheon run. It's in all kinds of places that is this multi-$100 billion business. Right now, it's $1 trillion a year business in the military-industrial complex. And so you can hide within $1 trillion global economic activity sector a multi-billion dollar, black, completely invisible operation that has only very few points of contact to the legitimate government that we think of, and those points of contact almost universally do not tell anyone about these projects. Let me tell you how this works. It's called an unacknowledged special access project, or USAP. And let's say you're a 4-star general, and I'm a lieutenant colonel. But I'm a lieutenant colonel inside one of these compartmented secret programs, or perhaps I'm an executive with one of these corporations. And you come to me and you say, I've heard a rumor about Project ZYX, and I want you to tell me about it. It's my responsibility to turn to you, even though you are my commander, officer, and superior, and say to you, you could be a senator or the U.S. president, and I am to turn to you and say, sir, no such project exists. Now, I have a very, very excellent authority from my main military advisor who has set up my meetings for the Joint Staff and for the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, because he's been in one of these projects, that if you don't do that, there's a bullet with your name on it. So, you know, the problem is that you do have this rogue infrastructure, and when Eisenhower gave his swan song in 1961 that said, beware the military-industrial complex because it's going to take on so much power, it's going to escape the safeguards and the checks and balances required by our Constitution. I'm paraphrasing, but you can read it in the book. Basically, he said that because he, as a 5-star general and a 2-term conservative Republican president, knew that he had been lied to about these projects. He knew the UFOs existed, he had seen a lot of the evidence, but the control of the technology transfer, the control of the R&D, the control of what was really happening in this subterranean secret government infrastructure, he completely lost control of it. He regretted it.